All right. If you're in this room, you're going to be exposed to some serious energy conversations today. We have a great panel going on right now, and I'm going to pass the microphone off to our best buddy over at SCR, Scott Coulter.
All right, thank you, Christine. So one housekeeping thing, we might have a few slides. Go figure out how to put those on.
I need two of myself. When you guys figure out how to clone me, please let me know.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm Scott Quillinan. I'm Acting Executive Director for the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. How many people are familiar with the School of Energy Resources? All right, I love all those hands. That makes my heart happy. At the School of Energy Resources, our mission is energy-driven economic development for Wyoming. And we have a really great crew there that show up to work every day. They roll up their sleeves, they flip on their light, and they go to work for the state of Wyoming. They go to work to advantage our energy position as a national energy producer every single day. They work on innovation. We train the next generation of energy leaders, and we do a lot of extensions. So we really meet that land grant mission at the School of Energy Resources. But in the energy space, this is really exciting times. AI has been a game changer for how we look at what energy needs are for the future. Has anybody in this room used AI? How often do you use AI? Let's put it that way, right? It's just part of our everyday life. If you do a Google search, it uses a very minimal amount of energy. If you put that search into ChatGPT and run it through AI, it uses 15 times more energy than that simple Google search. If you're one of those folks that loves to make those AI-generated figures, which I do, right? I like to send them around the office. That uses 30 times more energy than that standard AI chat that you're doing. So this is, for the first time since World War II, we're seeing incredible increases in forecasted energy. Now, how does that work well for Wyoming? So Wyoming is the power plant of the nation. I think everybody knows we're an energy state. We supply energy to the rest of the U.S. And I think the fact that goes around is we produce 14 times more energy than we use here in the state. And that's true. We supply the nation with energy. And that leaves Wyoming as a rail car full of coal. It leaves Wyoming as natural gas and oil through a pipeline. It leaves Wyoming as electrons on the wire. We are powering the nation. So when I pick up the newspaper and I hear about a data center that's being built in Texas, I'm like, okay, that's fantastic, because Texas is our biggest, consumers in Texas are our biggest customer for Wyoming coal. When I hear about industrial facilities being built in California or Oregon, I'm like, okay, this is fantastic. Those states are our biggest customers for natural gas. And so there's incredible opportunity for Wyoming as we think about these forecasts, as we think about how AI comes into the nation. And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit today. So I'm going to hand it off to our panelists here. How we've framed this discussion today is we've given everybody just about 10 minutes or less to make some opening remarks. We might have a few slides to throw at you, but then we're just going to go into a question and answer section. And I have a few questions, but I promise all of our panelists here, we have a very active and engaged audience. So we want to take your questions first, and so be ready to throw those throw that at us. So today we've got Braden Connor. You're going to tell me how to say your last name. I always try to say it. From the Wyoming Energy Authority, we've got Jim Ford, County Commissioner, but he also wears a couple of hats here in Campbell County. Jake Hochard, who is a professor for our Hop School of Environmental and Natural Resources at the University of Wyoming, and Fred McLaughlin down there at the end, who is at School of Energy Resources with us. So, Braden, why don't I hand it over to you? If you would just start with an introduction of yourself and then take it away.
Thanks, Scott. Braden Connor, Director of Investments at the Wyoming Energy Authority, oversee what is the Wyoming Energy Matching Funds program, and then coming to the Wyoming Energy Dominance Fund, rare earth funds, and whatever else kind of seems to flow through our office as far as energy investments in the state of Wyoming. Got a few slides just to look through. The Wyoming Energy Authority, I went too far. There we go. So our mission is to advocate, facilitate, and advance Wyoming's energy economy. We started out in, I believe, 2021. We were kind of the merger of the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority and the Wyoming Pipeline Authority. Became the Wyoming Energy Authority, and again, just advocate and facilitate and advance Wyoming's energy economy through whatever that may look like. Moving forward, so I touched on the energy matching funds, and the title of this panel is Sustaining Wyoming's Energy Economy. And so one thing we talked about before coming up here was kind of some projects that we have done through that program. Just kind of initially in 2022, the Wyoming legislature appropriated funding. It came out to be about $155 million to put forward to provide matching funds, so 50-50 match funds for grants across the state in energy projects. And there's a list of kind of the areas that we could invest monies in. The funds are actually held in the governor's office, so he has final say on whether or not we fund or not said project, but we administer the program. We're on kind of the tail end of the program. We have spent about 153 million. We're sitting on about 2.4 million. If you follow anything that we do, you saw the governor just approved or I guess that might be coming out. The governor just approved a project this week, and so if you want to watch the press release on that. Yeah, I broke that. We'll be in trouble. But just something that I wanted to bring. We at the Energy Authority the Wyoming legislature asked us to do a study on energy from like 1970, I think, through now, to show what energy has done for the state of Wyoming. So we did that. The report is on our website if you want to go look at that. But we also, with the consultant, had them do a side study on the energy matching funds. And then this was a year ago. So at this time, we were about 131 million in. They projected out that by 2035, the program would be projected to have 1.2 billion to Wyoming's GSP. So what started out as 155 million in 10 years will turn into $1.2 billion. And so I think that we've invested well in projects that will continue to sustain Wyoming's energy economy. I do believe that those the left side is those highlights of the net annual impact to Wyoming GSP, and then the right side charts just kind of shows the top chart is the matching funds and how it's, like I said, has been pretty much distributed. Right now we're sitting at about a 3-to-1 match. So for every $1 that the state of Wyoming through the energy matching funds invests, we're getting about 3. So I'd say that we've leveraged that money very well. And then the awards that we put out by sector, we've spent a little bit of money in the nuclear sector, one project in the renewables world, but the majority of our money has been going to our legacy industries, whether it's coal, oil, natural gas, uranium. And so, like I said, I do believe with that return on the investment, that I believe that we've invested our funds well. I mentioned at the beginning the Wyoming Energy Dominance Fund. The Wyoming legislature this past session graciously trusted us to kind of continue what you would kind of see as the energy matching funds, but a little tighter window. It is severance tax money, so we're taking severance tax money. We're capped at 105 million, and we'll turn around and invest that in projects. It'll be dollar for dollar match, just like the energy matching fund. And we'll invest that in energy projects that the hope is will help Wyoming's energy dominance on the national and international levels. They also gave us a rare earths fund. As most know, that the rare earths and critical minerals are a big topic nowadays for national security. They gave us $16 million in matching funds to administer, to give to separation and processing. That's what they want the companies in our state to do. And so both are getting ready for showtime. They both open. We kind of run our programs based on like the Department of Energy. We take a concept paper and an application phase, and it goes through the process. Both of those programs open July 1, and it's exciting to see what the Energy Authority, what the state of Wyoming will get for applications for the Energy Dominance Fund, and what this looks like moving forward. Just like to highlight our partners. SCR is always on there. Enhanced Oil Recovery, the Governor's Office, DEQ, through those. Like Scott said, we're going to be quick, and so just wanted to kind of roll through. Can happily take questions afterwards, but again, Braden Carr, the Director of Investments at Wyoming Energy Authority, and pass it on to Commissioner Ford.
Yeah, thank you, Braden.
Before we continue, I wanted to know if everybody in the room can hear, because I'm up front and I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing.
Yeah, good. I was going to ask the same question. How's the volume in the back?
Good. You just need
Is that-
your microphone right in your
Is
mouth.
that good? Okay.
Yeah, speak loud.
All right, sounds good. So that's an appropriate question too, because during our prep work for this panel, I think most of what we talked about was telling me to stay on timeline and not modify. So I'll do my best. I'm actually going to set a time. So I'm Jim Ford. I'm a part-time county commissioner. I'm a full-time advocate for the energy industry in Wyoming, here in the Powder River Basin. Scott mentioned the fact that Wyoming is the powerhouse for the United States relative to the amount of energy we provide that is in such disproportionate share to the size of our state economy, to our population, to the number of primary energy workers in the extractive industries and all those secondary and tertiary support industries. We play a role in this nation that I don't think there's anything else that I can imagine where we could play such an outsized role and such an important role. Energy really is the industry that underpins and supports every other industry, and we should be proud of that. We should also take it as a responsibility, right? It is ultimately important for us, not only here in our own hometowns, for our neighbors, but for the nation as a whole. I see some folks here, in municipal government, with our college. I'm in the county government here, and with the exception of some of the full-time professional roles, governance in Wyoming at the local and state level, these are part-time jobs. It means that unless you're blessed enough to be financially independent and retired, which I'm not, it means you're working somewhere else. And I really love the fact that I'm able to meld the responsibility and ability to do things in local leadership from a governance perspective with a career of expertise in the energy industry. I think it's a unique perspective, and it's one, again, that we should take advantage of at every opportunity where local leadership is concerned. A few things that we thought would be interesting, maybe to prompt some questions later on, is where local government is concerned, how do property taxes affect local governments, and what are the considerations, particularly in a community like Campbell County, where about 86 or 87% of all of our property taxes are property taxes related to the energy industry, not to what most people think about when you hear the word property tax. Most people think about their homes. They think about residential personal property taxes. And that is ultimately important at the individual level. But in this county, I want to say it almost doesn't show up on the books, right? I believe about 6.5% of our total assessed value in Campbell County this year is attributable to the assessed values on residential personal property. So when we have broader discussions at the state level that talk about property taxes, it's an entirely different topic here than it is in some place like Goshen County. So that's important for all of us, and we come from our unique perspectives around the state to recognize and understand that. You know, another thing, again here, recognizing who pays the bills, and as a having the responsibility of stewardship of those public dollars to provide services, who's actually putting the money in the kitty, right? And who expects to receive some services from that? You know, the corporations, the businesses that pay the majority of the taxes around minerals, they also require services, things like roads, things like good infrastructure, things like a community that has great quality of life investments so that their employees want to be here, not just for the job, but for their life, for their families, for their future. One of the things that is really important in a community whose revenue sources are dominated by the minerals industry is to understand, recognize, and plan for volatility. Tie this back to property taxes. The assessed values and subsequent property tax levies on residential personal property, it hasn't changed a lot in the last few years in certain communities in Wyoming. It's typically gone up and up and up. It almost never goes down. If it does, it is local, and it's usually not very extreme in measure. But it's not uncommon at all for us to see natural gas triple in price seasonally, or drop to 1/3 of its price seasonally. Coal sees less volatility. The uranium industry sees wild volatility over decade spans. And if you are in a community that is largely dependent on the energy industry, you've got to recognize that first and foremost and plan around that. We want to talk about energy innovation in this panel over the next little while. And one of the things where innovation is concerned is that you just have to be open to it. The future tomorrow is what's normal yesterday, right? The innovation of today becomes the legacy industry tomorrow. It's always been that way. We can't get stuck in this idea of saying the way it is today or the way it's been in my life is the way it should always be. There was a time even in Campbell County when there wasn't a coal industry, right? And that presented a lot of change. It was innovation. It was a departure from the norm, and it's hard for people to change. We get stuck in our ways, and it's important, particularly from a local leadership perspective in industry and in government, to just recognize that the change is going to come. We need to position ourselves as the powerhouse of the nation to be ready to step in on the supply side of the market equation where energy is concerned, whatever that energy is. And we're so blessed, so richly blessed with energy and non-energy mineral resources here that almost no matter what the ask is for the rest of the nation, what is that preferred energy source? What is the energy sector that has a price preference at the time? We have the answers if we're willing to do it. And so with that, I think that I'll hand the mic off. Looking forward to a good discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I don't go next. All right, I'll go next. So I'm Fred McLaughlin. I got some slides.
We're trying to pull them up right now. There's a
Okay.
plastic.
So I. Jake doesn't have slides, so I'm gonna have Jake.
All right, thank you, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Is that loud enough? Sometimes I get too loud and I don't realize it. My name is Jacob Hoshard. I'm the Knobloch Professor of Conservation Economics at the Help School of Environment and Natural Resources. The Help School is a longtime friend and collaborator with the School of Energy Resources, longstanding relationship. We also house the Ruckelshaus Institute, which has been serving the state of Wyoming for over 3 decades, largely in a convening role, bringing communities together, grappling with tricky questions, opportunities, navigating future opportunities for the state of Wyoming. And within the Help School, I'd say especially our legal scholars, our economists like myself, we do work really very closely with the School of Energy Resources. My background has historically been in resource management. So I did my graduate work in economics, and then so far in my career applied my program around the areas of wildlife management, water resource management, land use, energy. So data center development, very popular topic right now, is kind of the holy grail of all of those various resource questions. So in the past year, I've been focusing on what the implications are for data centers within communities in Wyoming, within communities nationally. So going back to Scott's initial points, data center demand for energy is shifting that curve way to the right. It's, for the first time in modern history, increasing need for electricity production nationwide. The opposite side of that same coin is within communities where data centers are sited, there's tremendous opportunity. There's also a lot of fear, anxiety, concern. These are not popular buildings. The approval rating for data centers and AI generally in the US is somewhere in the high 20%. In China, it's somewhere in the high 80%. It's a marked cultural difference between those two countries. So the question that's preoccupied me for the past year is, how do we make data centers bargain for communities? And I have a short amount of time here, so I'll kind of preview the answer, at least as I've come to learn it. The answer is not blindly veto data centers, and the answer is not blindly accept data centers. Currently, nationwide, the data center companies, the hyperscaler tenants, the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons, the Microsofts, they need us, they need the state of Wyoming, they need our resources as much as we need their jobs, their tax base expansion, their energy infrastructure investments. A year ago, I probably would have not made that prediction. Now, in early April, we held an event in collaboration with my colleagues at the University of Wyoming, where we brought in some of these major hyperscalers to Jackson for 2 days. We brought in executives from Google, executives from Meta, executives from Microsoft, executives from Amazon Web Services, as well as our energy industry leaders in the state. We had Tallgrass there, we had Peabody there, we had TerraPower, Black Hills Energy, a bunch of other community organizations, business development organizations like Wyoming Business Council, Cheyenne Leads. We were delighted to have Governor Gordon's participation, several legislators, students from across the state. And it was still pretty intimate, about 50 people, round table, closed doors, no media, and just having a frank conversation of, what is it about Wyoming that you find desirable? Why do you want to invest $50 or $100 billion in this state? What is it that we provide that make us competitive? And also, what do we get out of the deal? So after that event, with these leaders from hyperscalers, AI firms, tech firms, energy firms, scholars at the university, we then worked on an article that'll be coming out next week that says, what are the conditions where we can do well? And we're fortunate in the state of Wyoming that we are a desirable place for data center investment. These can drastically increase property tax base, sales tax collection from the sale of energy at the meter, energy infrastructure development, as you have companies like Microsoft did 10 years ago, in allowing their backup energy sources to create more resilience in the Cheyenne grid through Black Hills Energy, tapping into it during peak demand. So there's a lot of ways to benefit from data centers, but I think the old arguments of taxes and jobs really don't win the day anymore because of the skepticism around this technology. So we need to be more nuanced in how we set up that bargain. We're lucky in the state of Wyoming to have had leaders, elected officials that are very savvy, as well as some of those community organizations that I referenced before. We're also lucky that we have a cultural pastime of energy production. We've been a net energy exporter in the state of Wyoming, an energy producer. We're not afraid of energy production. We're not afraid of industrial siting. We are concerned about our water use. We are concerned about our land use impacts. So I think in the past 3 or 4 years, the momentum we've seen around energy production and data center attraction in the state of Wyoming has been well guided. We've had leaders that have negotiated good bargains for the communities. Now that's scaling up fast. Those bargains and the terms of those agreements need to remain durable as we scale from a 200 megawatt Microsoft data center to a 2 gigawatt data center to a 10 gigawatt collection of data centers. So we have an exciting future in front of us, but we need to make sure we negotiate those terms for the communities. And I think that we're in a really great position to do that. And I think we have great leaders that are well poised to ensure that we're getting something out of the deal as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the conversations we've had, some of the findings we've found from across the country where deals have been negotiated, terms have been set, clever community benefits agreements have been jotted to support local communities. Monies from Google, Meta, Amazon have gone towards rebuilding parks, rebuilding emergency medical services. There's a lot of ways that these deals can be inked. And I think we have a better negotiating position than we might have had in the past. So I'm excited to share that knowledge, to share some of the insights that our team has come up with, and answer any questions that you might have around that.
Thank you, Jake. So I'm Fred McLaughlin. I'm with the School of Energy Resources, and thank you for your hard work here, Christine, getting your slides up.
Thank you. We had a technical error over here with the internet.
No
It's okay.
worries. So I'm going to finish this off by just sharing some insights on how federal funding might work for energy, just to kind of high level, and what we see as some emerging energy opportunities in the state of Wyoming. Honestly, I think the flavor. I don't quite remember what I put.
Standard.
Yeah, I don't remember what I put together. That's why. So I'm going to stand up and talk with the slides. So first off, let's take a look at how the DOE, because that's kind of the federal piggy bank, of course, for federal funds for energy, is structured. So this is from 2026, so it's not recognizing the future. And total discretionary is about $46 billion. That's a lot of money. Obviously, that's a lot of zeros. That's carry the 9 or something if you want to make it simple. But please be aware, most of this is allocated already to maintaining our nuclear fleet, waste management, stuff like that. So that knocks down that opportunity to kind of key in those funds. Really, what we're looking at overall, what we see the state of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, there are just a couple of these fun colors up here. So I'm going to key into that. So that really kind of limits what's actually available across the board for universities, for private industries, for nonprofits that kind of key in for energy costs. Let's look at 2027 and key in on some of the things that we see in the next budget in those offices that we're really interested in. So first and foremost, under the new organization, new administration, DOE's reorganized once again all their major offices. And that's put kind of a stall almost a year and a half now where we've seen any funding releases to the DOE. There's been some, but not a ton. We also see this across all government right now, a large reduction in these offices that we're interested in for Wyoming. So going forward in 2027, things are going to be tighter. So not only have they not released the Fed's energy funding opportunities in well over a year, now things are going to be more competitive too. So things have been kind of challenging lately. But there are new offices that favor Wyoming's energy sector, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, share that stuff, and maybe it might help those folks in the room that have some sort of connection there. So first and foremost, before we do that, let's talk about federal energy funding importance to Wyoming. I didn't say why. Well, because I forgot what my slides look like. Yeah. So this is School of Energy Resources 2027 budget. I noticed that the numbers I had on there disappeared, but the important thing here to recognize is orange, and that's our grant capture, and that's almost all federal funding. It's a lot. So over half SER's budget for 2027 is going to be grant supported. Every single one of those grants is directly working with industry in Wyoming to help support some of their research needs. Sometimes it's really focused on commercialization. Sometimes it's focused on helping them do field projects. Sometimes it's helping them, we've got smaller businesses here sometimes that don't have kind of the research capacity that the university does. So sometimes we kind of help them for a moment on their way as they get going forward and hopefully go forward. Now, historically, SCR's biggest kind of grant capture successes have been in carbon management and capture. So that can be either storage or enhanced oil recovery, or the Wyoming Integrated Test Center that's just up the street here. In critical minerals and rare earth elements, as Braden said, and nuclear energy. So What's next though with respect to DOE's coming budgets and the reorganization? Well, one of the exciting things is they have a new Office of Oil and Gas. So for many, many years, we have been unable to tap into federal funding for oil and gas because they didn't have programs directed to it. So this is kind of a historic look at Wyoming's field production of crude oil through the years. This pink here is where we invested heavily in enhanced oil recovery, both infrastructure and research. You can see that kind of flattens out. And here we see the classic horizontal fracking shale revolution bringing us back up. But their new Office of Oil and Gas is going to focus on a couple different things: production, transportation, storage, power fuels, and chemicals. So if you have angles there, the industry there that can benefit from any of these kind of three topics, we'd love to work together to see if we can position ourselves to take advantage of that. Another new DOE office that's very exciting is the Office of Coal. And I just copied their bullets there. You guys can read them. So we haven't seen this well, since I had hair, I think. Coal funding, I feel like. But there is going to be a directed effort to help modernize and extend the life of our existing fleets and do some other things. And the other neat thing about some of the DOE offices, there's kind of cross-contamination. So we're doing work on coal right now to see if there's rare earth elements or other metals in there that can kind of build a resiliency in the industry instead of just digging coal for one activity only. Also new is they combined a couple different offices to build a new Office of Critical Minerals and Energy Innovation. This is the Howland Creek mine site down by Wheatland, so just kind of threw that up there for fun. And again, there's going to be a lot of focused effort, and this is one of the first things that got off the ground this year for releasing funding, for doing a better job of domestic resource characterization and development. One of the big goals is to try to limit our national security risk by taking metals from other countries. Let's do it all in-house if we can. Extraction and processing and manufacturing will also be a big touch point. We know how to mine. This is where we get tricky with respect to the economics. In the United States right now, it's hard to compete with stuff that's already built and existing. So we hope to see some directed effort there that can help Wyoming producers maybe take those next steps forward, because it is complicated. And Jay can talk better to this than I can to kind of make an impact on markets that are controlled by foreign countries. The other big push we see, even though I showed that very first slide almost, where half of the funding for nuclear is allocated towards the existing fleet, they are still going to fund some nuclear research. And I think we're well positioned there. We have one of the biggest uranium mining operations in the United States. Plus, there's a lot of activity here for uranium conversion. Of course, the Natrium reactors going in Kimmer. So we feel like we're a step ahead here, and that'd be very beneficial, I think, for getting in front of federal funds. It's always better to be a step ahead for federal funds because you've got a better story and they want to have successes. The other one that's really interesting that we're seeing some movement on is geothermal energy resource. So Wyoming in the past has had challenges meeting that. Even though we got Yellowstone, they won't let us drill it. So we're not going to get that resource ever, unfortunately. But I'm a geologist. Wyoming's crust is really old and cold compared to the western U.S., which is a lot thinner and allows GP to get closer to the surface. Also, population's really distributed. So what we're seeing now, though, is a lot of recent drilling activity that technology has really boosted for geothermal, which is fantastic. So we might be able to get deeper and hit some of this deeper stuff in Wyoming. We also see the need for kind of adding industrial power to discrete places, rural places, right? Most of the power usage in Wyoming is still mining activities or oil and gas pumping stations and compression stations. So if we can find some ways to build in some geothermal energy in Wyoming, I think it'd be very helpful. And we're well positioned now to do that. The first geothermal test well was drilled at Warren Air Force Base just recently. Part of that is one of their national kind of missives to be more self-sustained, even within their own kind of plot of land. Now, do we trust the DOE trends is the big question. How do we position ourselves for these? So this is a figure from some colleagues down at the National Renewable Energy Lab, recently renamed. This is what Wyoming's energy production looked like in 2023, generally. This blue box here that you see is wind. And Now, this is during the Biden administration when they were putting a whole bunch of money towards renewables. So they did some projections. What might it look like in 2030 if that went forward? And look at the amazing growth in this blue box here. Now it takes up most of projected Wyoming's energy usage, and it's just not going to be that way for a variety of reasons. So it's fun as academics to kind of sit here and ponder what might happen next. But we do have some insight on what might happen at least in the next year or so. We'd love to work with anybody in the room to try to support your energy research needs. And with that, Drew, I'll hand it back to Scott. You can take over the panel.
All right, well, thank you, Fred. So at this point, we're going to open it up to the audience. And let me just start there. Is there any questions out there in the audience? Oh, I see I've got a mic roaming around.
Yep, so one housekeeping thing, if you have a question, wait for me to get to you with the mic, and then that way everybody can hear it. Particularly online is really important.
Perfect. And Christine, can you give us a quick time check?
I have a question for Jacob. You mentioned an article, and I was wondering, is that going to be published in a journal, or is that we're going to read in the newspaper? How are we going to find that article?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I hope the answer is both, and it will be. So the journal is less of an academic journal. It's joint between the National Academy of Sciences and Arizona State University, and then we'll have offshoots that cover that in local Wyoming news outlets as well. So we're going to distribute that far and wide because I think it's useful as a blueprint. How do you make these data center investments worthwhile and get the most out of them for the communities? I think that's a blueprint or a playbook that people have been looking for. Because this has happened so rapidly with these investments around the country, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from those that have been early movers. And to date, those haven't really been collated. So we're hoping to get some of those lessons out there.
I see another hand up over here.
So what does a small community need to do to set ourselves up to be a recipient of any of these innovations? I recognize housing would be one, which we don't have, but what else do we need to do?
Jim, that sounds like maybe a county level kind of thought.
Yeah, so thank you, Gail. One of the things, my opinion differs from some in Wyoming state government and even here in Campbell County government. I sincerely believe that government has a role in economic development. It's not everything, but there are absolutely things that we can and I would say must do. And one of those things really focuses on, like I mentioned in the opening, making sure that there is a focus on infrastructure. You can't grow an energy business if you don't have people to run those businesses. And while we may not be able to control housing, and maybe shouldn't, what we can do is make sure that there's good streets, sufficient wastewater treatment capacity, good water supply, make it possible for developers to create the housing in a way that they can do it responsibly, both in time and responsibly from a price perspective as well. So, those are fundamental roles of government that do enable economic development. And the less tangible piece of that puzzle is to have a vision, be vocal about it, have a positive view of the future that you can share with others, or that matches their business-focused view of the future. The communities and the business developers and the financiers all have to come together in that shared vision. And government shouldn't exclude itself from participating in that vision and that communication. We are at a grants conference here. There are certain grants where local governments, colleges, special tax districts have the ability to be grant recipients that maybe direct industry can't. A lot of that does go towards community infrastructure. So those are some of the things that we can do, should do. You can do those in a general sense without knowing what specific project is coming or what particular company is coming. coming. And so those are things that often take a long time. And so it takes vision, it takes consistency, it takes daily work to make sure that those types of things are priorities within the budget of your town, of your college. I think that's where government can play a role.
Anybody else on the panel want to contribute to that?
I can, I think. So one thing we'll do, if we haven't won an award in an area that's a new area, we'll do like 80 student, younger to older, the sophomore student to the junior will go ask how the test went, basically. So we'll reach out to people that have already won awards in a region you might be interested in an area, and just kind of ask for their input, what worked, what didn't. And they're a resource too that you can tap into. So.
All right, let's open it up. Any more questions out there? Those are great questions to get us started.
So you mentioned this big need the country has for additional energy, and there's also a lot of reference to the diversification of energy sources. What do you see as the biggest limiting factors in meeting that demand, particularly here in Wyoming?
All right, panels, anybody want to take that one? WEA? So let me take a quick stab. As our energy forecasts grow, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place. You need transmission lines, it takes a long time to build a power plant. And so I think, the permitting takes time, it just takes time to put all of these things online, and we want them tomorrow. And so as we see a lot of these, new developments come in, I think what we're going to begin seeing is behind the fence energy production. And so that'll mean off the grid type of energy production. And so you might see a large industrial facility that has to bring in their own natural gas turbines, or maybe they're going to go for an oxide fuel cell or something like that. But all of those are subject to supply chain challenges and issues. So let me stop there and hand it off to the panel. What other large obstacles are you seeing?
I'm gonna kick this over to Commissioner Ford real quick. So just, I will say there's an article that just came out recently, a book that was titled "China is Run by Engineers and America is Run by Lawyers." It means it's very difficult to build things in the U.S. It's very slow, and I think the current administration, previous administrations have worked to try to alleviate some of that red tape. We haven't had the same urgency, at least in the energy sector, that we've recently had this surge of need for new electrons on the grid. And I think that streamlining will come, but it'll come with a delay.
Yeah, that's a great lead in. And, in one hemisphere, we might hear something described as central planning. Here we might talk about a national energy policy. Could anyone here articulate what our national energy policy is?
Unleash American energy.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. I love it. How? And I think the real limitation is, that big projects take a long time. We hear about the project that Anschutz Corporation, Power Company of Wyoming, their subsidiary, a large wind turbine project down in south central Wyoming. I think that project has been a project for them for maybe 14 years or so that they've been 18 years. Okay. And, for them to make use of that amazing wind resource that's there, to find customers that are able and willing to take that. I understand that the power transmission corridor that they've tried to, or are developing, across maybe like 27 different jurisdictions of federal agencies, of states, of counties, of tribal lands, of conservation districts, all these people that had a voice, and legitimately so in our system, a voice in that project. And that is extremely difficult to overcome if it is a single private industrial actor that is trying to navigate that pathway and doing it without a solid national energy policy that has consistency. All the big ideas will absolutely endure beyond whatever knucklehead politician is sitting in whatever office. That's a fact. At the local level, the state level, the federal level, the big energy projects will outlast most of the career professionals that are sitting in an agency office somewhere. And so that, Glenn, I think is the real limitation. And it all comes down to what I see at the practical level in the private sector is that capital will not come to projects if there is too much risk about the rules of the game. And, you know, if the project's going to take, you know, a new coal-fired power plant in Campbell County, which might take 7 to 8 years from decision to first generation, the political landscape can change drastically in that amount of time. And we are selling ourselves short as a nation by allowing that to happen. Energy cannot be a political football that gets kicked around. Right, I saw a couple of hands back there.
Thank you. You'd mentioned transmission lines. So those are kind of like the highways for our energy to get to our customers, to purchase it. And we've been discussing need for more transmission lines for 35 years that I've been a professional, right? And have sat at these tables. That's the infrastructure we need in order to get our products out and purchased and make Wyoming more sustainable through, you know, that part of the resources that we have. What have we done in the last 30 years? I don't know. Maybe I just don't know. Maybe I'm just ignorant. I probably am about it. And what are our plans for the future as a state? Are we working with other states to get our stuff, get the energy where it needs to go, especially in this data center boom?
Good question. And so the Wyoming legislature has taken note of that as well. And so the Wyoming Energy Authority in the coming months, well, actually I think it's short term, coming weeks, are putting out an RFP for a transmission study across the state of Wyoming to really understand. I think probably we could look at where constrained areas. It's probably not too difficult to see those, but I think we would get a higher level view of what that would be. And so I think that study is supposed to be done before the next legislative session. And so it'll be out there and for consumption. And you know, the hope is like we can understand the project. How do we put resources towards the project to help move that along?
Right, other questions?
I think this lady is first, so.
These are great questions, by the way, thank you.
I told you they'd have
Yeah.
questions. I told you.
Well, and I'm just a fundraiser grant writer for nonprofits. I'm your average citizen. But the word that keeps coming to me has already been touched on, and that's regulations. Is it time everybody's hands behind their back before they ever get started? And how do you deregulate once something's been regulated?
Boy, that's a good question for you guys.
Good luck. So I'll let my panelists think about how to answer the regulation question, but I want to provide an example of where Wyoming's leadership has really shown in that space, and that's in carbon capture and storage. And so the political winds have sort of pulled away from carbon capture and storage, but if you think back to where our leadership and our legislature were thinking of, 2015-ish, and they were seeing coal markets declining. They were seeing a huge national concern around carbon and CO2 emissions. And the thought leaders in our legislature and the governor's office got together and started to put together a legal framework so that carbon capture and storage could happen here in the state. And when you have that legal framework put together, that gives certainty to investors that are out there. And so you can have somebody in New York say, oh, look at what Wyoming's doing. They're putting that legal framework in place. This starts to de-risk my project. Wyoming continued to do that with that legal framework. They then got primacy for Class 6 injection wells. Where did the first carbon capture and storage projects occur? Right here in Wyoming. And so when you think about regulation, I think there's a lot of thought leadership that can happen at our legislative session or level that develops that legal framework to help these projects get going. And let me kick it off to the panelists to see if there's any other thoughts there.
Sure, Scott, I can follow on that. But push back a little bit on the idea of deregulation, and you're right that here at the Wyoming Integrated Test Center is a project that's here in northern Campbell County that is it's the largest in the nation. It's one of only 2 on this continent that is a megawatt scale CO2 capture demonstration facility. It's a real life coal-fired power plant. The University of Wyoming SER administers that project on behalf of the state and the stakeholders. I'm privileged to get to play a role in helping with the field operations there at that site. We had a really unique case, the first of what's going to be many, of Japan using Japanese federal dollars through their Ministry of Environment with a consortium of private actors, corporate private actors from Japan that brought their technology, brought their capital to Wyoming, to Campbell County, specifically because we had built out a legal framework upon which we could flesh out regulations that would allow CO2 capture to be run like a business. And they came from across the world and spent 3.5 years here with us because of that regulation. Okay? So regulation is not always bad. I'd say it's not always bad either, because most regulations, particularly environmental regulations, happen because someone screwed up in the past. Some got greedy or got lazy or just made a mistake. So, in balancing expansion of our energy industries, modernizing our energy industries, we still need to protect our wild places. We need to still protect our land and water and air. So I'm not sure that deregulation in its own right is the right answer. Now, streamlining of regulations, absolutely. Certainly we should look for opportunities to do that. I think of situations from a federal perspective. Is it the Chevron doctrine? The Chevron doctrine that basically said, rolling that back and saying, it's up to lawmakers to make laws. It's not up to regulatory agencies and bureaucrats to sit there to have the power of imposing law and regulation. Okay? That's where we can improve, roll back, or streamline regulations. Things like the SPEED Act that really accelerate the timeline with definite boundaries on the calendar about when federal agencies must take action. Lots of room for improvement. Those aren't necessarily deregulation in my mind.
Another really good example is NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. That was born out of good intentions and necessary intentions of highway systems being systematically sited in poor neighborhoods. But it needed to be modernized over time, and now we're seeing reforms to NEPA that allow for mines to have a better shot at permitting and some of these quicker actions so that we can continue building things in the U.S. Another example is utilities. Nobody saw this surge in electricity demand coming. It snuck up on us. If you look at Fred's plot, we produce something like 10 gigawatts of electricity in the state. Most of that is exported under long-term contracts. So I just want to shine kind of a magnifying glass on the surprise element that this energy transformation represents, and that it takes some time for these resources to be reallocated, redistributed, policies to be updated. And I think we're in that mix right now.
Hi, I just had a question about energy tariffs and how that works. I've seen some things in Cowboy State Daily about how like Black Hills Energy, they're gonna impose some kind of energy tariff that will help protect the consumer from rising utility costs. So can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, so the initial large load deal that was minted by Black Hills Energy back in 2013, 2014 with Microsoft and Cheyenne was in a way precedent setting for the nation. And it actually speaks to how far ahead Wyoming has been in this respect. Just this year, maybe last year, the current administration put out, I believe, an executive action saying ratepayers should not experience increases from data center loads going onto the grid. We were 12 years ahead on that with that pioneering work by Black Hills Energy and Microsoft and Cheyenne. Each of these utilities, I'm not going to go too far out of my depth here because it's not my area of expertise, but these large load tariff agreements are created by these utilities, the regulating bodies that oversee them. And some utilities like Black Hills Energy have been fantastic partners to data centers. There's shared risk involved. Nobody knows if the AI boom will continue over what horizon, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So there's a lot of joint investment being made. There's unprecedented magnitudes of those investments, $50, $100 billion investments. They need certainty. So yeah, these tariff agreements that are emerging, these large load agreements that are emerging, I think show how far ahead Wyoming is, at least against the national backdrop. Does anybody want to add to that? That's about all I can offer on that.
Yeah, so Heidi, just a little bit, again, not my area of expertise, and for the room, we're talking about tariffs, which are the legal and regulatory structure which dictate how utility companies charge their customers, and not tariffs on imposed tariffs on imports of some goods at the federal level. So within those electrical service tariffs, we have the Wyoming Public Service Commission, Utilities Commission, Public Service Commission, that acts as the regulatory body that essentially is there to protect the consumer, to work with the energy producer, with the G&Ts and where they are in regulated markets where they are protected, to make sure that the energy consumer, at your home, at your business, that there are not impositions of costs and fees relative to the additional infrastructure, the cost to maintain those, or the cost of the electricity itself. And so I think that executive order or guidance from the federal level has been mirrored by Governor Gordon here recently, just in the last couple of weeks. There is something unique with the city of Gillette. The city of Gillette, I believe that one other municipal government, I think it's Torrington, LaGrange, also act as electricity utility within the municipal boundary. So that will start to get maybe a little more complicated, one more level of detail where the city of Gillette is concerned and establishing those tariffs. And I think, the folks that I talk to with the data center developers, with the electricity generators, there's a high degree of acceptance that say those new incremental demands should carry their own weight, and that shouldn't necessarily be borne by the, I'll say, socialized system that we have all come to enjoy over the last 70 or 80 years of electricity provision, that started with the REAs in this state. So.
All right, other questions?
We have about 15 minutes left.
15 minutes, okay, great, thank you.
What about water usage and data centers?
Yeah, this is why I like to frame data center agreements as, negotiating your bargain. Is what is the acceptable level of resource sharing? Because water resources in Wyoming are Wyoming's, right? They're ours. We choose we choose who to share it with. We choose where it goes, what industries or sectors use it. There is precedent from around the country for trade-offs that can be adopted to be more water conscious. You can use air cooling systems that are less water intensive, but they're going to be more power intensive. closed loop technology systems that have been widely adopted or are widely planned in the state of Wyoming that use very little water. But there's also more to the story than just the data center water, right? There's the water that's used with the on-site gas turbine generation, the electricity generation on-site as well. I think there's still ambiguity over how much water is used by these data centers. I don't think with the modern technology, the water conserving technology, I don't think it's massive. However, what we've seen around the country is elevated reporting standards that are minted when the deals are struck between these data centers and the communities to say, if you go above 20,000 whatever units of water a day, this is how much you're going to get charged for it. If instead of annual reporting or monthly reporting, we want weekly reporting. So you can put different standards of agreement and reporting on these data centers to make sure that the community is comfortable with the resources that are being used. And this is why I like to make the argument that these communities are in the driver's seat to negotiate their particular bargain, their particular deal. And I think the data centers more than ever are facing such a tremendous bottleneck in compute and the need to get this infrastructure built. What we're learning, which I think is counterintuitive, and this is from conversations with Google and Meta, they want you to negotiate hard. They want the terms to be aggressive, and they want them to be published transparently. Because the worst thing that can happen to a data center, and this is an epidemic that's happening across the US right now, is within a year of the project, people start protesting, and a bad headline for Google is way more costly than a $20 million community benefit agreement that pays for local services or pays a premium for water use. These things are drops in the bucket. We have to realize that we're in the middle of the largest capital mobilization in the history of the planet, $10 trillion likely. So you've got all the 401ks and pension funds of the Western world bankrolling companies like Google for these investments. The community should get a piece of that. And the hyperscalers from our conversations are very willing to share that piece. So we just need to ask for it and put pressure on them. And if they feel like that arrangement is going to make the community happy, it'll be durable for them over the next 30, 40 years. And that's the partnership that they're looking for. So I think we're in a great position right now.
All right, other questions?
We have one.
All right.
So I had a question of replying to that. So how are we helping these communities so it's a fair negotiation with the major corporation?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And it's exactly why we're doing the work that we're doing, because many communities don't have the resources to even know what the appropriate asks are, to know what the bargaining terms could be, or know that they could walk away from it. And a lot of remote communities, I think we're fortunate in the communities that have been data center recipients in the state of Wyoming. We have organizations like Cheyenne Leads that are pretty savvy with this. As we move into other communities like Evanston, like Casper, I don't know what the infrastructure, the local knowledge of those negotiations are, but I'm sure it spills over across this small state with the experience that we have with data centers. But across the country, there are tons of examples of these negotiations that have happened in cases where people have asked for some pretty wild things that make sense, and that you wouldn't just think of if you're, an elected official or a local community development group. E-waste management. This building might go for 50 years, but those servers and those chips turn over every 3 years. So where does all that electronic waste get buried? These are the kind of things that you want clear terms on. So I'm hoping with a playbook, best practices, we can say, hey, here are some reasonable asks. If this matters for your community, be sure to adopt them. There are places in the country where noise pollution is a really big deal. Maybe not as much in Wyoming because we have some space, but there are residential neighborhoods that are adjacent to data centers, and there's advanced buffering sound protection that you can install. You just have to know to ask for it and make that ask. So there's a lot of those kind of practical examples where we need to get that reporting out. And I think it's very important for those asks and those conditions to be transparently communicated to the communities, because that's how you build support and go from 27% acceptance rate to, yes, we want this person in our backyard.
So I just want to give a quick plug for the Hop School of Natural Resources. These folks really are out in the communities, they're on the front lines, they're helping communities navigate these conversations, they're convening them to make sure that they get all the stakeholders in the room. Great to have a partner at the Hop School. All right, see another question in the back.
So along the lines of those negotiations, and when we're
talking about water, we're talking about electric, we're talking about infrastructure. Working in social services, seeing multiple municipalities across the state dealing with increasing rates, whether that be water, whether that be electricity. If you look at the national average, Wyoming municipalities are well behind the national averages. However, that's supported within our infrastructure as well when you look at our infrastructure. When talking about data centers and bringing in such extravagant projects, how will those affect essentially the local consumer that's already feeling the pressure of municipalities who are having to make tough decisions of big jumps in those utility costs to support that infrastructure along the energy lines? So, one thing to consider is don't come into that question thinking that it only can increase costs or increase burden to the individual or to the community. There are very clear instances in Wyoming. Again, I'll use the Powder River Basin coal mines here for one thing, that those huge single point loads on the grid make our grid more durable, more capable. When the cost of power generation and transmission is concentrated at fewer points of delivery, it actually improves the grid from a structural and functional perspective and reduces the cost to the individual consumer. We need to look for those opportunities and not automatically go into the conversation thinking there are only negatives associated with this growth or expansion. I think the community benefits agreements is a piece of that puzzle. The ability to structure unique tariffs or even customer or sector specific tariffs for that are really, I think, the legal and regulatory tool that we have to protect against the downside.
Yeah, and I think the Microsoft example, going back to 2013, 2014, is a good example of how you can negotiate these terms to make sure that consumers are protected and that the economies of scale from these massive investments really spill over and actually benefit the community. And I don't think it'll just happen. I do think you have to make sure that those agreements are minted the correct way. But when Microsoft put their first large load, 200 megawatts in 2013, the deal with them at Black Hills Energy was, all of these data centers have full redundant power backups, just a massive amount of potential electricity generation, most of which is almost always standing idle, because they need to be up for 99.999% of the time of the year. They can only be down for a few hours per year. So they have primary power, usually a grid interconnection, usually some behind the meter generation, as well as usually diesel generators to back up all of that. And in the case of Microsoft, the deal was Black Hills was able to tap into that backup generation during peak hours to bring more power onto the grid and control prices so that communities benefited and get prices down. So that was the initial model. Now that was 200 megawatts. Now we're talking about projects that are 10x that. So as we scale rapidly, we need to make sure that those benefits continue to diffuse to the communities and that they're wrangled in a way that is helpful. So I think these are valid concerns, these are things we need to keep an eye on. But more energy infrastructure, more stable and modernized infrastructure should be a good thing for the communities as long as we structure it the right way. And on the water side, you have similar analogs. So Meta is looking at doing a massive riparian watershed restoration project to support water uses. They're putting 350 megawatts of solar plus 200 megawatts of battery on site at their current data center development site. So all of that together should create some serious resilience. And I can't think of a reason why it wouldn't drive down prices just having that sheer magnitude of power production.
We have about one more minute. I have one question over here.
Okay, go for it.
So with our projected push forward with developing data storage and AI development, what kind of technology and education needs do you see that Wyoming needs to develop and build into our education basis?
Well, Jake, I was gonna see if you thought about that.
We're glad Jake's here.
Yeah, so I can tell you what we're doing at School of Energy Resources. School of Energy Resources, we have a professional landman program, so we just opened up a data center concentration. And so we're training kids, not kids, students, they all feel like kids to me. Training students to understand the full cycle around a data center, so they can understand water use, power use, all the technologies that go into it. And hopefully we can get these students out across the stage, get that diploma and out working for these companies so that they can help bring that to the communities and help with the education components. I also want to put a plug in for our Energy ELK group, and we misspell ELK, it's ELC. But our Energy ELK group, and it stands for Engagement, Leadership, and Careers. So they're a social science-based group that we have at School of Energy Resources, and they're working on the workforce development needs of many of these emerging technologies that are moving out of the laboratory and into the field. And those are things like, we talked about data centers, but nuclear is new to Wyoming. We're training kids around nuclear. Maybe not nuclear engineers, but all the other components and skills that they need to help support a nuclear industry. Hydrogen, they're working on critical minerals. This summer, we're going to be hosting the second Critical Minerals Leadership Academy, where we're going to have early career professionals and graduate students from all over the country in Laramie, so we can do intensive training courses so they can get up to speed on critical minerals and rare earth elements. So at School of Energy Resources, we really take a leadership role. And so how we can continue to train meet those workforce development needs, get them out of the universities and into the communities. Hopefully they can find great jobs and bring that out. So anybody else want to hit that one?
I'll make a plug for Gillette College, and I think all of our two-year colleges here in the state of Wyoming. I had a little hard time hearing your question, but it's welders, it's pipe fitters, it's industrial electricians, right? It's system controls programmers, it's instrument electrician techs, it's folks that can sit behind a control board and run big energy or chemical or manufacturing systems. Those are the types of jobs that we need to train. We're already the best in the world about extracting energy and mineral resources out of the ground. We need to, leaders, particularly those in education, need to build a workforce that helps us mature as a state, as our industries get out of this dig it and ship it mode, be able to climb the value chain where our resources are concerned through value-added processes in fractionation, refining, manufacturing. Those are jobs that are going to matter for the next generation.
Thanks, we're at time. Any last comments, wrap-ups, tips and tricks of the trade?
I told you, you guys could have talked for 2 more hours. So thank you for all the
Thanks for having us, folks. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.